So through the magic of having done stuff beforehand, it's kind of like roasting the chicken before you demonstrate how a roast chicken looks. Here's the chicken that we roasted before. And yesterday what we did is we actually had this, we did a water test just to see that it wasn't leaking, and guess what? It wasn't leaking, which is great. And we then removed the water so that no one would come and drown. That's a practical thing. So there's still a little bit of water in there, and it's still in there from yesterday, which is terrific. So a proper water test, and you can see when it's finished, it looks a lot like the one down where we were just finishing off, but all the angles are in place. What's also in place, you'll notice, is this piece of technology. And what that is basically like a standard, purchase it at Bunnings or at any hardware store, any landscaping supplier, perforated pipe. In this case, we're not draining water, we're actually supplying water. So this is used normally to drain landscape, but we're using it here to supply water. And the reason it's so long is, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, is basically when you put the water in, depending on the medium that you put in there, and in the handout we're talking about a coarse aggregate. Don't use gravel, because gravel tends to be too fine, but something like a 7mm size, that's very common. You can buy it at any landscaping supplier. You can use scoria, you can use like stone, you can use all kinds of things. We've actually got 20mm. But the recommended optimum one is 7mm, but 20mm works perfectly fine. That's in all the beds that we have in the garden, 20mm. We'll be asking for your assistance to bring over some of that and put it in here. And then what we'll do is we'll actually fill this with water, and then we're going to test a few sort of like of the practical aspects of a wicking bed. So I'll just mention one of them. This is the hole that we drilled. We didn't get through to finishing off, but that's okay, because what you'll see here is the elbow piece. It goes on the inside, and it allows water to be drained out of the system. And it also allows you, what we've done beforehand is we've set this overflow, what's what this is, an overflow, to the height of the water that we want inside the wicking bed. So depending on how high you want the water in your wicking bed to be, that's the height that your overflow will be. So if this was up here, the water would fill in here and it would keep going until it gets to the overflow point. If you set it too high, you end up with too much water. If you set it too low, you don't have enough water. So this is about 150mm to here, to the bottom of the wicking bed. So here we've got about 150mm of reservoir, and the rest is going to be soil. The reason we've got this little item here is to stop mosquitoes getting in there. May not be a problem, but highly recommended. We're not going to glue this in. We're just going to sit that there. Unless you're a muscling mosquito, obviously you're not going to get in there. And then when you're filling with water, you would just take that off, fill with water, and when it starts overflowing, you know that you've filled your reservoir, and you just put that on. Does anyone want to volunteer why that's there? Yep, exactly. So it's to flush out the reservoir. Because unlike a garden bed at home, when it rains, when you water, it basically just goes away. There's no away in a wicking bed. Everything you put in there stays in there. So over time, if you fertilise, you might use like reused water, say from your washing machine or things like that. Over time, you'll build up salts and you'll build up fertiliser, and that might take a long time, but at some point you might want to clean out the reservoir. If all you've got is this, then you don't really have a method. So what you do is you put this point as low as you can, so you get as much of the water out as possible, and that is what that's for. And then, yeah, so at some point you might want to just fill up the reservoir, unscrew this, and then you can catch that water if you want to, or just let it go away. When it stops emptying, you put that back on. You probably would use this very infrequently, but it's a little detail that you probably want to think about. If you want to sort of like come around to this side, what you'll see is that we've done a different design for the inlet. So if you're not using rubber, because nothing really sticks to rubber. It's one of the good qualities of rubber. So when we first started this bed, we hadn't quite thought that far ahead. And what that meant was I wasn't terribly confident of a watertight seal. So therefore we showed you the other method that you can use, and is the recommended method for rubber membranes. So the method we showed you down there is the recommended method for rubber membranes. If you don't want to do that, if you don't think you can shove it through the hole like that, you can do what we've done here. So what we did is we cut a bigger hole in the membrane, and all we did was that flange that we used before just sits up against that on the inside with a whole lot of silicone. So you can have a look at that. It sits on the inside of the membrane. And you just got to make sure that you leave it there long enough that the silicone sets. You don't want to be in a hurry with this. That's another one of the reasons why we split the workshop up, because we thought we were going to be doing this twice. So we thought we'll let this one sit and be nice and ready, because for the sake of the workshop, we might have ended up with 2 non-working wicking beds. Not the desired result. So this is just a slightly different method, basically does exactly the same thing. Anyway, back to the pipe. The function of the pipe is to allow water to get into the bed quickly. Because what will happen is if you don't have a way of getting a lot of water in quickly, you might be standing there for half an hour waiting for the water to sort of percolate through to the other end of the bed. And then if you've got the outlet close to the inlet, it says, hey, I'm full. And it's like, no, because you'll come back later and you'll find that, I've got a leaky wicking bed, but no, the water's just decided that I'm going to make my way down the other end very, very slowly. So the reason we've got a long pipe is basically to allow water to go in, and I haven't got my piece of plumbing. I'll just go and grab my piece of plumbing.
So another thing that we've got to remember with all this is, before we put the scoria and stone in, we're going to put some more geothermal down, just as a bit of a protection for the scoria, because that weight of the scoria, even though it's quite thick and strong material, it does have sharp points in the scoria, and we don't want to perforate the membrane at this stage. So this is what Beau's got in his hand.
Yep. This needs to get underneath the hose. For those that are really curious, you're probably thinking, why have they got a brick down one end? If you can't see the brick, come around and have a look. There's a brick. Water runs downhill. So what we want to do is put the inlet high inside, because this is going to be a bed of scoria or stone, in this case scoria. So we want to put it sort of up towards the top end of the scoria, so that when the water goes in, it actually goes out of the hose down into the reservoir. That's a little bit quicker than if we had it down the bottom and it had to kind of push its way up. Not a lot quicker, but if you're an impatient person, 10 seconds is a long time. So the next thing is we've got plumbing, please. Thank you very much. 2 pieces of plumbing, again, doesn't have to be this. I've got a wicking bed at home. I've got a 100mm pipe, because I'm extra lazy. It means I can put like a big hose down there. But basically 50mm is good. And then this little fellow is, again, to stop creepy crawlies from getting down into your reservoir. You'll find, if you don't do this, you'll find snails will love living in here. They'll absolutely adore it. If you put that on top, obviously they can't get in. Oh, actually, a couple might get in there. But, you know, most of them won't. And again, so these are the 2 sort of like the bits that you will see sticking out of the ground in the beds when you first came. So what I'll do is I'll just, I'm going to glue this in. So this is where you see some blue glue in action. I'm not going to glue this, however. I'm going to leave that on there just loose. Like I said, it's a dissolving solution, so it actually will melt the plastic. It happens really, really quickly. So be quick, I guess, is the main thing. What I'll do is it's like jelly. You just make sure it goes all the way around. Put that on. And I don't know if you can smell it, but it's really quite smelly. I then just push it in, give it a bit of a twist, and that's it. That will never come apart. And then that is basically going to sit there. The top goes on like that. That's it. Now, we don't quite know whether we need to fix this back onto here. We think not, because this is going to be filled with soil and scoria, so it'll probably be fine. But if you find that it's too loose, you can always fix it again. There's no problem with fixing through the membrane, because again, it's above the water line, so it doesn't matter. Now, scoria, so we need, again, some volunteers. We've got 2 wheelbarrows full of scoria already. Gary will show you where that is. And then, yeah, we're just going to fill the bed. What we're going to do is we're going to put some scoria underneath it for all the way up to the other end, and then it can just sit down on the bottom. So this is not sort of scientific, it's just sort of kind of what you feel. So what we want at the end of the day is basically 150 ml of scoria, nice and flat. And we want to pay attention that we get, that the reason why we're going to fill this with water before we put the soil in is we want to make sure that we fill in, it sounds pretty sort of like, why so particular, about 10, 15 mils above the water line with the aggregate. And the reason for that is otherwise your soil might become stagnant and anaerobic, which means no oxygen. And your plants won't like that. Plants need oxygen, so if you create anaerobic soil, you might kill your plants. Unlikely, because your reservoir is probably going to be partly empty most of the time, but it's just a small detail. So it works. So just remember, you want this pipe in the scoria, not in the soil. At the end of this, what we want is a nice sort of even layer of scoria sitting so we can't see the water basically, or just see the water underneath it. So that, to me, that's sort of what you'd want the whole length to look like before it goes down the bottom. So you can just see the pipe poking out over the top, no further.
Shall I comment that this is the controversial part? How high do you have your scoria above your water line? Like, very, very controversial, like.
Yeah, countries have gone to war over this stuff.
Well, how far is your scoria going to wick up is the question. You know, like how you know, so you don't find it, wherever you read, you never find a definitive answer to that, or common answer. So this can be one of those issues that you might want to resolve before you start pouring your scoria, is how high you're going to go.
I reckon that's pretty good. I mean, what you want to avoid is like puddles.
Bo, just here, because at the moment everything's sort of nice and tidy, but then we're going to put a whole heap of soil down, and that scoria is going to crumble a bit. So are we allowing for like a crumble crush factor?
A crumble crush factor. So the point Gary made is a really good one about settling. So this is day 0. This is when it's actually first in. But what will happen is that over time, little air pockets will fill, material will settle and compact. If you have multiple, like you can patchwork this just loosely. Doesn't matter. Doesn't need to be stitched or glued or anything. Just has to overlap. If you've got multiple bits, we've got one piece, which is nice. But it's okay to use lots of little pieces as well. That's fine. Just remembering why we're putting this in. It's to stop the soil from going down into the sort of like the nice void spaces that the scoria is creating for us, which is allowing us to store lots of water.
Preferably, when we're pouring the soil in, if we can push it up against the side of the geothermal, then it's less likely to get soil sort of just sifting down the side into the, because you're really trying to keep this as your scoria as clean as possible. Even though there's broken bits in there, it's just avoiding sort of any early sort of crossing over from the soil into the scoria as much as possible. To keep the water as clean as possible.
So yeah, so just remember, like that's your growing depth. That's as much room as you have for roots. You can see how smaller plants are. This is perfectly fine for about 99% of everything that we grow here. But if you want to grow, there's a rosemary bush there. We're wanting to grow hops here. We'll use that bed down there because obviously that's a much bigger, more aggressive plant. So that'll need more root area. So calculating soil volumes can be a bit tricky. That's a bit of cow manure, that's a cow pat, because things fluff up and they defluff. So we'll put in what we think is the right amount here, and then we'll need to come along and probably put another couple of barrow loads in a couple of weeks, because it'll just have settled that much. Yeah, so we've done it in the right sequence. You install the membrane, you test it for water tightness. We did that. We've then come back and we've put some more material down to stop the scoria or the aggregate from puncturing it. We put the scoria in so that what we think is the right level, and then we put water in there until it starts overflowing. That's your level, and then you make sure that you've got a nice even rock layer sitting just above that water line. More membrane, soil.